Norwegian Cruise, Ponant and Smithsonian. Hi, I'm Lori, a senior solo traveler, and I recently embarked on a 7-day Norwegian cruise with Ponant in collaboration with Smithsonian. This was part of a 30-day solo trip to Scandinavia and the Baltic region. However, I met a friend for the Norway portion of the trip, which made expenses more affordable. This video will summarize each destination day by day, including excursions through Ponant and my own explorations. I'll say here that Ponant offered daily lectures, live music, entertainment, special tea time displays, themed happy hours, spa services, and more. I will not be covering those activities in this video. If you are interested in more information on the Ponant ship, I have posted a separate video with that information and have left a link in the description below. Let's start with Day 1, Embarkation Day, Oslo. After spending a couple days exploring Oslo, I arrived at the dock at 3:30 p.m. on Embarkation Day. However, I was not allowed to board the ship until precisely 4 p.m. They did allow us to check our bags, but we had to find some shade while we waited. At 4 p.m., we were allowed to enter another area of the dock where there was a tent set up for processing us. Key cards were already waiting for us, so the line moved quickly. They took our passports and kept them until disembarkation. It was a quick and efficient process. Once on board, we were notified there was an introductory meeting to give us an overview of the cruise. Afterward, we had a safety drill followed by a buffet dinner. Day 2, Gothenburg, Sweden. An excursion was included in every port. I chose the Gothenburg City Tour and Museum of Fine Arts. It began with a bus drive through Gothenburg, which is the second biggest city in Sweden. Our destination was the Masthugg Church, which was built in 1914. It is positioned high on a hill with dramatic views of the surrounding area. You could see the statue of the woman by the sea or Seaman's wife in the distance. The church tower is 200 feet high and built in the national romantic style of Nordic architecture. We disembarked the bus to take in the lovely views from up high. It was a gloomy day with drizzling rain, but the perspective was still striking. We then attempted to enter the church, but it was locked. The guide said it was usually open 7 days a week. I pulled this picture off the internet. It would have been nice to see the interior, which has a beautiful beamed ceiling. We boarded the bus again, driving through the city and stopping beneath this Crown Redoubt, which was originally built to protect against possible Danish attack. Evidently, it is now a cafe. Nice perch. We were now in the neighborhood of Haga, which is a city district renowned for its picturesque wooden houses and 19th century atmosphere. It was originally a working-class suburb of the city with a rather bad reputation. At one point, they were going to demolish the area and rebuild it, but then war broke out and the transformation was stalled. After the war, when they started to deal with rebuilding again, people rallied and wanted them to keep the old neighborhood, but just restore some of the buildings. Fortunately, they did, so that it now has its historic charm. It is now a popular visiting place for tourists and Gothenburgers. We were given some free time to stroll the streets. The architecture was absolutely gorgeous, and the cobblestone streets and cute shops added to the charm of the neighborhood. Of course, there were some souvenir shops, but there were also many antique and artisan stores. We boarded the bus again and eventually disembarked at the Gothenburg Museum, where we had a guide lead us through the exhibits. I started following the guide, but soon split off from the group to explore the museum at my own pace. I'm glad I did because I was able to see much more of the museum than the group. There's a fair number of Scandinavian artists represented, but I was surprised at the breadth of the collection. There was a floor that included many modern artists, including Van Gogh, Picasso, Monet, and many others, and a floor with Rembrandt and other earlier works. There was also a special exhibition called Apocalypse, which had some wild works. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed the museum, which was quite easy to navigate. On the way back to the ship, the bus stopped at the city center and allowed people to step off and take a shuttle back. I was the only one that took the opportunity and was happy I did. The drop-off point was a plaza with a statue of King Gustav II Adolf. He is famously pointing down to where the city should be built. At least that is what people believe. I immediately noticed some tall masts down the street, so I walked to a harbor which had a large sailing yacht as well as plenty of other small boats lining the water's edge. Next, I wandered through the Harbor Street district, which was quite lively. and discovered the central train station where there was another large plaza. After about an hour of taking in the hustle and bustle of the district, I took the shuttle back to the ship. Before the ship left, there was a send-off performance on the dock by a local high school band. Quite fun. That evening, there was an announcement that we would be going to Kristiansand instead of Arendal the following day, due to high winds and waves making it difficult to thread our way into Arendal's port. Day 3, Kristiansand. The walking tour of the town began at 8:25 a.m. Kristiansand is a cute but small town. You can walk around the entire central town in a couple hours. The population is only about 150,000, yet it is the 5th largest city in Norway. We walked by the Opera House and Art Museum, which was evidently converted from a silo. We were told it won awards for its architectural design. We then crossed a picturesque bridge on our way to the charming harbor. Evidently, 60% of the population owns a boat, so it is an important activity. We were led to the statue of Camilla Collett, a female author and one of the first feminists. She fought for the rights of women to marry whom they wanted, a novel concept at the time. As we entered the historic district, we saw this beautiful primary school, the second oldest building in Kristiansand, and buildings that were designed to match the shaved-off corners of the streets. Fire is a consistent theme when you learn the history of any city, and these shaved corners were designed so that the fire brigade could quickly round the corners. Evidently, the historic neighborhood was the only area that survived a massive fire, so the architecture was able to maintain its historic charm. Eventually, we strolled by the Kristiansand Cathedral, which has a magnificent steeple and has an important presence in the central part of town. Unfortunately, it was locked, so we weren't able to see the interior. Our day in the town was short, and we had to be back on board fairly early in order to make our next port. Day 4, Stavanger. The ship arrived in Stavanger, Norway's 4th largest city, early in the morning. It used to be a fishing and canning village, but it is now a major oil town with offshore drilling. We only had the morning to explore. I had signed up for an excursion to the Olden Monastery, which left at 8 a.m. I was a little iffy about this excursion, but it turned out to be wonderful. We boarded a bus and enjoyed a 30-minute scenic drive out to an island. We had a fabulous guide who made you really want to hear what he had to say. We entered the monastery, which was built in 1260, and were first led to the chapel, where a man sang and played the piano for us. The setting of the monastery was acoustically ideal, with the melodic sound resonating off the chapel walls. It was just beautiful. The guide then led us to various other locations around the monastery, all while sharing the Norwegian history of kings and the monastery. It was shared in an interesting linear story. We finished in what he called the gardens, which were enclosed grass fields. The setting of the monastery was just gorgeous, with views out over the fjord and plenty of sheep dotting the landscape. The rooms of the monastery are built around a central cloister. The building is quite rustic with beautiful and intricate brickwork. After we returned to the ship, we immediately cruised into the Lysefjorden, one of the more picturesque fjords in Norway. With great weather, everyone was out on the decks. Music was playing inside the lounge, so it was somewhat of a party atmosphere. The fjord was lined with rock cliffs, hills, houses, and a few waterfalls. At the end was a rock formation called the Pulpit. We stopped at the end of the fjord and stayed for about a half hour, then retraced our path back out of the fjord, heading directly to Alesund, which was our destination for the next day and our longest trip. Day 5, Alesund. We were cruising in the sea all morning and arrived at Alesund after noon. We then disembarked to various excursions. I chose the strenuous hike up Sugar Lump Mountain. I expected it to be strenuous by testing my cardiovascular endurance. However, the difficulty was not just the elevation. You had to navigate stepping from rock to rock with mud and water. Several times I wondered what I had gotten myself into and wished I had hiking poles with me. We were all using our hands and feet to climb, but every one of us made it to the top, and it was beyond rewarding. The views from the top were 360 degrees and spectacular. I had to laugh though. Once to the top, I kept seeing Norwegians literally sprinting to the top. They definitely put us all to shame. We spent quite a bit of time up top enjoying the stunning views. I was really happy I made the trek. Once we got back to the ship, there was time to walk into the town of Alesund, which was purported to be quite lovely. I really wanted to go, but I was so spent from the hike, I decided to pass. Day 6, Hellesylt. Early in the morning, we began cruising through the Stavanger Fjord. I opened the curtains at 7 a.m. and we were surrounded by high mountains and a tall waterfall. This was just the beginning of a 3-hour journey through this breathtaking fjord. We were very fortunate with the weather, which was clear and unusually sunny. We eventually arrived at the Seven Sisters waterfalls, which has 7 streams of water coming from a very high cliff. On the other side of the fjord is a single big waterfall called the Bachelor. We also saw a rock formation that looked like a troll face. The entire area is just magnificent. The ship stopped for a short while in front of the Seven Sisters so we could take in the scenery and capture some photos. Here are some more images of the fjord. Eventually, we arrived in Hellesylt, and I joined a rib tour of the Stavanger Fjord. What they called a rib was basically a specially designed zodiac. We first had to go to a tent and put complete wetsuits on, as well as a life preserver. There was a row of seats in the middle of the zodiac, and you straddled your seat like a horse. I sat in front, which allowed me to shoot some fun videography. Check this out. The guide took us to a few places along the fjord, including some old farms that were high up the cliff sides. He explained how they managed to climb them, which was quite impressive. He also brought us back to the Seven Sisters and Bachelor waterfalls, but this time we were so close we felt the spray. It was a fairly short excursion, maybe an hour, and they returned us to the port. I still had time to explore, so I walked a loop around the picturesque town. There is a waterfall that rushes through the center of the town quite dramatically. I started on one side of the falls where there was an old mill. Then I hiked up to a bridge that was straddling the falls and had wonderful views from both sides. I headed back down on the other side of the falls, passing a quaint church. The road hovered over the village, and I could see the townsfolk sitting in their yards enjoying the amazing sunny weather. Day 7, Olden. We arrived in the pretty village of Olden early in the morning. I had signed up for what they called a troll car excursion to the Briksdal Glacier. I had one of the earlier start times, which turned out to be very advantageous. First, we boarded a bus for a picture postcard perfect ride through the village and mountains. There were red and white buildings, waterfalls, and streams. All just lovely. The buses took us to Jostedalsbreen Park. Sorry, that's the best I can do with that pronunciation. The park is home to one of the last glacier polar ice caps. We were dropped off at a little tourist area, then hopped into our troll cars, which are basically glorified jeeps, and then headed toward the glacier. The troll car took us a distance, but we still had to get out and hike. We followed a scenic path, walking by rushing streams, pretty wildflowers, and glorious mountains. At the end of the path, we reached a lake and waterfall. At the top was the glacier. The setting was striking, and this is where being on the first excursion was advantageous. We were one of the first groups to arrive, so we enjoyed a quiet setting and unobstructed views. Later, the tour buses kept arriving, and the path and area surrounding the lake got more and more crowded. By the time we got back to the bus area, it was swarming with people. It had also started to rain, so the visibility was worse. I was really happy that we had been able to hike and come back with great weather and no crowds. On the way back to Olden, the bus stopped at the most beautiful lake, one of the most picturesque places on this entire cruise. The turquoise water was clear, you could see waterfalls feeding into the lake, and the surrounding majestic mountains made an awe-inspiring picture. It was a great final stop on this amazing cruise. The next morning, disembarkation in Bergen was easy, and I was the first one off the ship at 8 a.m. So was this cruise worth it? Yes, yes, and yes. I have been to 62 countries, and Norway is now on the top of my list of beautiful places. I do think we were lucky with the weather. I stayed in Norway after the cruise and later experienced a very rainy day traveling through a fjord, which completely marred the views. So I'm very happy that I was able to experience the fjords with great visibility. For senior travelers, Ponant provided opportunities for all ages and abilities. The only caution I would give would be to consider your physical limitations if you plan to hike Sugar Lump Mountain. It was certainly worth the effort, but required physical stamina and agility. For solo travelers, the small number of passengers allowed for people to easily connect with other travelers. Everyone seemed to be having a great time. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the comments section. Please subscribe and turn on notifications if you'd like to follow my Scandinavian and Baltic adventure. Also, check out the Senior Solo Travel website and the Travel Facebook forum where you can interact with other travelers. Look for links to those videos as well as others from this trip in the description below. And if you'd like to follow my senior and solo travel journeys, please like and subscribe. Next stop, Bergen, Norway.